Support for Lab Out Loud is provided by the National Science Teachers Association. Find out more at nsta.org. NSTA members could save even more on their auto insurance with a special discount from Geico. Go to geico.com/edu/NSTA to see how much more you could save today. You're listening to the Lab Out Loud podcast, Science for the Classroom and Beyond. Today's guest is an old friend, and he's here to talk about the Serengeti Rules.
All the basic rules of what determines the numbers of plants and animals in a given place are on display in the Serengeti, and they're sort of easy to understand when it's zebras and giraffes and elephants, and these are charismatic animals. They're very familiar to us. Those rules really were discovered elsewhere first, and these rules apply across the globe. They apply in forests and savanna and lakes, in the ocean. Really, every place is a Serengeti.
That's up next on Lab Out Loud, but first, I'm your co-host, Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartel. I love this time of year, Dale, because a lot of the time during the podcast, it's like snowing and white, and it's actually a little white outside my basement window, but that's because there's flowers. So it's spring, which also means this is our last show of the season.
That's true. It's always sort of bittersweet, but never fear. You can always go back and listen to old episodes.
10 years of episodes, actually 11 if you count periodicity.
A lot of people actually do. There's a lot of back catalog listening because we get feedback in the summer, so it's kind of fun.
Yeah. And this time of year too, we think about having like who we've had on the show. At least I do, and we've had some pretty strong guests and some repeat guests as well. We need to get them like a robe or something, like the Five Timers Club,
like in Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, exactly. like the Steve Martin, like welcome to you get the next set of perks or something. I don't know what that is, but we should have something. But in any case,
today's guest is approaching that. That's for sure.
He is a five-timer if you count periodicity, because this is Sean Carroll, or Sean B Carroll, and we had him on in periodicity when we did this show for Wisconsin Society of Science Teachers, and when we went into NSTA, we've had him on 3 times, and so this is our 5th time closing out season 10. I think it's fitting because we love having Sean Carroll. He's a fantastic storyteller. Of course, his credentials are more of like an evolutionary biologist. He actually is by trade a molecular biologist and geneticist at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and he's also the head of science education at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute.
And what's new in his life is he actually took a trip to the Serengeti. And what you would expect is that you would look at the Serengeti and be awestruck. But what surprised us is that he also looked at it and thought he didn't really recognize what he was looking at. And that was a shock for us because, we're like, dude, you're a biologist. Why did you feel that way?
Well, I'm an indoor biologist. I've worked, on genes and embryos and process evolution. I've looked at how the animal kingdom was made, but I really don't know how the animal kingdom works in the sense of, you have all these magnificent animals on the Serengeti, and why are there so many wildebeest and so few topi, which is about a similar sized animal? And, how does the whole place work? And as a biologist who wants to know how nature works, it was somewhat unsettling to me to realize that I didn't really understand. And, and if you think about it, most of us have seen a movie, films on TV, probably in the first 90 seconds of a film about the savannah or about Eastern Africa, you're going to see a cat, chase or take down a gazelle or something like that. And that's kind of
obligatory footage.
Yeah, obligatory. That's sort of the picture that it's all about that. But as I learned more, so particularly after I'd been in the Serengeti, as I learned more about what had been studied over the last 50 years, I began to appreciate that that's not the centerpiece of the Serengeti, that the little somewhat homely and overlooked but numerous wildebeest is really what makes the Serengeti what it is, that 1 million lawnmowers moving in about a 600-mile circuit around the Serengeti really shape that landscape and have enormous influences on trees, grasses, insects, giraffes, carnivores, and that's what makes the Serengeti the way it is. And we need to appreciate these things. And so that my revelation, if it was a revelation to me, and I'm a professional biologist, I thought that those kinds of insights into how nature works, might be of interest to other folks. And so that was sort of the launching of the Serengeti Rules, which is really about how we know how life works at lots of scales, including the level of the Serengeti, but also all the way down to what takes place inside our bodies. And there's some interesting parallels between those things, and I thought that was another way to sort of tell the story, is to help people appreciate that there's a lot of logic to life when you get down to the details. And
So you got in touch with your inner field biologist?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, most biologists I know, I think that's the catalytic experience is getting outdoors and seeing wildlife, or it may have been it may be a museum. It may be, as it was for me, a combination of snake hunting on the edge of Lake Erie as a kid, and watching programs like Wild Kingdom and saying, I really want to go to these places in the world. It took me 40 or 50 years to get some of them, like the Serengeti, but I got there.
Was this like a family trip, or was it all business? I mean, not like any science teacher or person of science can go anywhere without turning it into a study.
The first Serengeti trip, this is summer of 2014. I took my family. My kids are grown, but I thought that since I hadn't seen it, and there were some threats, there was talk of building a highway through a paved highway through the Serengeti, right through the wildebeest migration route. And I thought, well, we better see this place before, in case it changes.
I did the same with my family to Glacier. I was like, let's get there before
there's no ice left. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was part of it, and then it led me into various places. I've met a lot of pioneering ecologists. I'm not an ecologist, and I really had very little contact with that field for the last several decades since I was in school, and they've learned a lot about how nature works, and so I've met a lot of those pioneers, and they're in the book. And then, and let me just broaden this a little bit. Just like I gave you the reason for taking my family, the question comes up, what shape is the biosphere in? And I really felt I needed to answer that for myself, and particularly to answer the question of, can it be saved? In other words, is it too late? Are we doomed? There's of course a lot of pessimism and a lot of bad headlines out there, but I really kind of had to see this for myself and talk to a lot of people for myself to see where that was. And the conclusion that I come to in the book is, no, there's actually still time to change the road we're on. And I met people who are changing things. I closed the book with the story of a place in southeastern Africa in Mozambique called Gorongosa National Park. And it was a place that was, in the 60s, was a jewel, rich with large wildlife, devastated by a civil war from the 70s through the early 90s, and would have remained devastated were it not for an American philanthropist named Greg Carr, who learned about Mozambique and learned about Gorongosa and thought, well, one of the things we could do for the people of Mozambique is to bring back the tourism industry, and the way to do that is to bring back the park, and that would be a good thing for both, wildlife and humans. And he started that project in 2004, and so in 2015, about a year into the book, I went to Gorongosa and saw it up close and what had happened, and the rebound in wildlife is spectacular in just 11 years. And and it's really lifted, Mozambican pride in Gorongosa, and there's all sorts of science going on in the park, and Greg has invited essentially the world scientific community in to study the rebound and study the restoration, and now there's an even bigger vision for Gorongosa that is to expand the conservation area almost eightfold. It's big as it is. It helps to have a helicopter across Gorongosa, but in 2017, people are talking seriously about creating a conservation area as large as the Serengeti in southeastern Africa, something that could hold as many as 10,000 elephants, maybe 500 lions. So the arrow is not all pointing downward. There are places coming back. And in that time, Carr has spent more money outside the park on human needs, education, schools, community education centers, healthcare, farming programs, girls' clubs, more spent outside the park than inside the park. So a big message is that conservation's got to be integrated with development, or it's just not something that will be sustainable. Human development, and so the world is really paying attention to the Gorongosa story, because Carr was told in 2004 that it was a hopeless case, so why would he even bother? And in kind of 2017, it's a poster child for bringing places back from the brink.
So is it even possible to describe where we stand as a world when it comes to extinction? Because
patchy.
Yeah, it's patchy. Okay.
Patchy. I think it's patchy. I think that's the way it's going to look. I think if you think about, one of the big messages of the book in the Serengeti Rules is so let me tell you sort of why is it called the Serengeti Rules, not just because I went there, but really all the basic rules of what determines the numbers of plants and animals in a given place are on display in the Serengeti, and they're sort of, to me, they're kind of easy to understand when it's zebras and giraffes and elephants and lions, and that these are charismatic animals. They're very familiar to us. Mm-hmm. But those rules really were discovered elsewhere first, studying all sorts of creatures, and these rules apply across the globe. They apply in forests and savanna and lakes and in the ocean. Really, every place is a Serengeti. Your backyard rose bush with aphids and ladybugs, and a nearby pond with bass and minnows. All these places are essentially a Serengeti in the types of rules that are operating in there that determine the diversity of the community and the numbers of individuals of various things that are in the system. And we got to understand these rules in order to manage them really for our own selfish needs. Right? There's 7 billion plus of us on the planet. We need food, water, medicine, air.
Oh, absolutely.
We just need to manage these places better. So it's not just about making places like Gorongosa pretty again or things like that. It's really about managing the places that we depend upon for, especially for food and water, to manage them well. As I said, I grew up on the edge of Lake Erie, and I never swam or I never put a toe or fished in Lake Erie. It was so polluted. Here's this great body of water that 200 years ago was spectacular, mm-hmm. and we've turned it into something much less.
That's a good way of saying it. Now,
we shouldn't live that. We shouldn't live that way. I mean, the world doesn't have to be that way. We are now smart enough, know enough that we can have, more productive lakes, more productive fields, healthier forests, and things like this that produce the stuff that we need.
And I've always thought that too. In looking at environmentalism in that scope, I think is important. And I might make some enemies here saying this right on the heels of Earth Day, but I've never felt save the world for the world's sake. The world's going to be fine without us long after we're gone, but we want to make sure we preserve things for our own needs and to enjoy it for our own productivity, for our own livelihoods, but for for our own enjoyment of what is abounding around us, abounding in nature, as well as for medicine and other things too. And so I think that's a very important part of environmentalism that's not always brought out.
Yeah, I think maybe it needs a moniker like functional environmentalism as opposed to sort of aesthetic environmentalism, or you might say almost moral environmentalism. I mean, we can still identify with those other values.
Absolutely.
The common cause we can have as a species and as various, every nationality, et cetera, is functional environmentalism, which is making sure that systems that we depend upon can be as productive as possible, and that we don't deplete them to a state beyond recovery. Right, that we don't mm-hmm. outfish things and there's no more, that we don't clear cut forests that are watersheds that are crucial watersheds. We've got to be alert to this. And you asked me about the state of things across the world, and I think that in the current day, and I think for decades to come, it's going to be a very patchy picture. Some places, if they don't have the institutions, if they don't have the kind of governance, then, you're going to see probably, further resource depletion and exhaustion. In other places where if they have the governance, they might get there in time to not only stem, further declines, but even, reverse things. And so I think some places are going to be in horrific shape, and you're going to see, massive refugee situations, and you're going to see drought and famine situations, and in other places they're going to do a lot better. And I think that's just a realistic way to look forward. To whatever we can do to help, let's do it.
When we come back from the break, Dr. Carroll will discuss the importance of sharing the environment and how we need to consider everybody's viewpoint when trying to come up with compromises to use the land.
Hey, I'm a farmer. I get better yield when I use this particular, when I put phosphate on my crops. But when it washes into the lake, you get green lake. Now you've got a conflict. You've got somebody on the land wanting to use the land in a certain way that's going to affect that lake. What do we do? Well, what you got to do is you're going to have to sit at the table and figure out what can be done to mitigate the runoff. Because when something somebody else does affects the livelihood or the quality of life for somebody else, these are the conflicts that we have to sort of resolve.
Saving money with Geico is easy. Did you know Geico offers a special discount on car insurance to NSTA members? After the podcast, go to geico.com/edu/NSTA or call 1-800-947-AUTO to get a free quote. When you do, be sure to mention you're an NSTA member because you could save even more with your special discount. Not only will you get outstanding coverage with Geico, but you could save hundreds on your car insurance. When it comes to saving money, don't drop the ball. Contact Geico today for your free quote. And now back to our interview with Dr. Sean Carroll. We pick up talking about how we deal with competing concerns when it comes to how we use our environment.
You can't take a blank slate and just say, well, let's take all regulations away. Well, where's that going to lead?
Mm-hmm. That's we know where you bring your Lake Erie back. That example is exactly.
And that's why the Chesapeake Bay is on a multi-decade recovery plan, is because it first had to be destroyed before it needed to be recovered.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of ideological simplicity doesn't get us anywhere. You've got to wrestle with legitimate competing concerns, and I don't have a single answer, but those concerns should be grounded on good science. In other words, it is a fact that phosphate fuels algae growth. It is a fact that lakes may be warming in particular areas somewhat rapidly, and they may be drying up. So, I think lake scientists can tell us what that's going to mean, and we've and the thing is, we've agreed, we've accepted fishing limits for decades, right? You don't take out when it says 2 per day, you don't take out 20. There's a reason for that, right?
Yeah.
So we accept this. It's kind of like accepting speed limits, right? This is kind of for the collective.
Well, the collective good of everyone.
Right? If you pour something into a lake, you're affecting the collective good. It's going to get regulated.
I think we actually had answers, and I'm rereading Leopold's Sand County Almanac, where he talks about a land ethic, and it kind of harkens back to some of those themes back then. And that what's interesting though, I'm reading that for an upcoming class, so I'm actually excited to be thinking about it through the lens of where have we gone for the last 20 years and where might we be headed. But nevertheless, I think now we have a lot more data. You kind of mentioned, talk to the lake scientists, and have you gotten down to the limnology department lately? But we know a lot more about what's happening and what will happen if we continue a certain course or if we don't intervene. And so, and I think sometimes we ignore that. We ignore the data more that it's staring at us in the face.
Funny enough, I tell the story in the book of Lake Mendota right here in Madison, which turns out was one of the subjects of one of the largest scale ecological experiments ever undertaken. Started the year I arrived here as a faculty member. I didn't know it till I wrote this book. But Steve Carpenter here at Wisconsin was kind enough to sit down with me a couple of times and explain to me the history as well as other people associated with the experiment. But Mendota was struggling, particularly in the 80s, with water clarity and even earlier, with human sewage and things like that coming into the lake. And we can get wiser. We can have healthier fish populations. We can have lakes that everyone can enjoy in a variety of ways. It just takes sensible management. And one other theme in the book is sort of good science and good management. If you don't have both, you're in trouble. If you know the science but you don't have good management, good policy, you're in trouble. And management can't guide things blindly without knowing the science. And sometimes some conservation policy, you might say, wasn't really necessarily science-driven. It may have been driven by, other impulses or other sensibilities.
Emotional, economic, industrial. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we need to match those things up. And or even the aesthetic. I mean, you could sit there and say, well, look, if we're talking heresies, look, I think the Endangered Species Act isn't generally a good idea, and a number of species have really benefited and been brought back from the brink because of those protections. But I can understand that, because of the way biodiversity is, that there are places, for which there may be an insect or a fish or something like that, would be impacted by some human development. Well, is that where we're always going to draw the line? That is that a little bit too absolutist? Do we have to be a little more flexible about the treatment of scarce populations of things? I'm not talking about grizzly bears and wolves and stuff where I think that, their ecological impact is clear and their vulnerability is really clear. But, we may have to revisit our sense of what must be preserved in an ecosystem and what might not need to be preserved. And that should be based on science.
If we think about our listeners, teachers of science, science students, is there a key message that you want them to hear regarding this?
Learn the rules. Learn the rules. I mean, I think ecology. I think there's just a few things to appreciate. Kind of big concepts for people to appreciate. They're totally graspable, and and then as citizens, emphasize. What's the science behind any policy? What's the scientific rationale for how we manage our resources? And I think we just have to insist on good science, support the science, and good management. And that's what science is sometimes like. We have to do long-term studies. Yeah. We can't necessarily figure something out in a 3-year grant term. We may need to monitor a place for 10 or 15 or 20 years, and that means supporting it through, changes in the scientists involved, changes in the agencies involved, and all that kind of stuff. We need a little longer-term view than may be standard. Because when systems, if something's decaying, 1% a year, you don't measure much in 3 years. But in 10 or 15 years, it's going to be evident. Or if it's declining 2% a year or something like that, you need to know these things, and you need to, head them off. So a lot of this is about long-term study. And I'd say in general to the science teaching community and to scientists, we need to support ecological research more. I think that it's been a under-supported area. My tribe, molecular biology, biomedicine-oriented research, has gotten the lion's share of all resources. But, ecological health is really important for both human and economic health.
Supported how? Is that like nationally or supported within?
Everywhere. I mean, from the DNR in places like Wisconsin to, nationally, EPA, NSF, Interior Department, public lands, et cetera, that we have to be, I think especially this long-term research and monitoring is really important. You've got to know what you've got and what's happening to it in order to shape and how it works, in order to shape proper policy. And in order to be sure, and this is just really simple, in order to be sure that it's there in at least as good, if not better condition 20, 40, 60 years from now. I mean, I think that's now you get to the moral obligation. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know how you justify consuming resources that then won't be there for an even larger population 20, 40, or 60 years from now. That's just not, that's irresponsible,
Yeah, the long-term studies, I think that's an emphasis we as science teachers have to really work on, because sometimes we get trapped in, the chapter, the quarter, the semester. I mean, the things you just listed off before go way beyond an entire kid's career.
But I can tell you a story of if you open up chapter 6 or 7 in Serengeti Rules, I could tell you a story of what Bob Payne learned over decades of studying tide pools, or what Tony Sinclair learned in more than 50 years in the Serengeti, and what Mary Power has learned by studying lakes and streams. And so this knowledge is out there, and we can communicate it, perfectly well in the classroom, and show it, because really there are a good number of pioneers who've spent their lives trying to understand these things, and we couldn't have put this in the textbooks 50 years ago, but we can today. So let's do that, and let's just emphasize that we need to know how things work. We need to know what we've got. We need to know what's happening to them in order to manage them.
We always hear like hands-on science. I think what I'm hearing from you is hands-on science, not only hands-on the lab, but hands-on what we've learned from the past.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's a foundation. What have we learned from the past that guides our understanding of the present? I mean, that's fundamental. And you have to go to story. You have to understand. It's very hard to tell a project you're starting today where that's going to go and where that's going to be in 20 years. So you need the perspective to look back and say, well, hey, this study was started in 1965, and what have we gleaned from that? And this monitoring was started now at a particular time. And imagine if we didn't have that data. Imagine if we didn't have, the cumulative data from the top of Mauna Loa, right, which is the CO2, atmospheric CO2 monitoring and things like that. So, we
imagine if that data just suddenly disappeared off of government servers. Wait a second. Oh, wait.
Different question. The data is hopefully still there in the world. It's just a question of whether people choose to ignore it. And that's perhaps a subject for a whole nother discussion.
That's a whole nother conversation.
What we as scientists and educators can do. As scientists, we get the data. As educators, we help, share that information, with the broader society. Those missions will never change. There may be other things going on in the let's just say in the background or even the foreground that might make that job easier or harder, but that mission never changes. Yeah,
that's important to remember. Now, Dr. Carroll, last time we talked with you, first of all, you've been on the show many times, which it's been fantastic. We talked to you, I think, back in 2007.
I actually went back
10
and
years
listened
ago.
to the 2007 one, and for some reason, I swear I sound younger. It's scary.
But the last time that we had you on the show, we talked about one of your recent books out there, and you brought up the example of the rock pocket mouse, and first of all, you're telling me that you probably have never seen the rock pocket mouse up close, but that you were just examining data for the book, which is coming to
but now
it's coming to a realization.
With Michael Nachman, I've been there.
Yeah, you did. Yes.
Yeah.
But never mind that. I use that because I love that as a story. It was a great way to, first of all, replace the peppered moth narrative that we all had bludgeoned. But that one really stuck with me. Do you have like a darling story from the Serengeti Rules that just speaks and you've heard educators use again and again in their classrooms?
I think we're trying to get there. So we made a film about the work by Bob Payne, pioneering ecologist Bob Payne, and the role of starfish as keystone species, and also same film with Jim Estes about the role of sea otters as keystone species in the kelp forests of the Pacific Ocean. So that's a film available free through HHMI on trophic cascades. So that's a classic work and a key concept that's in the book, but again, it's available as a film supported with information. And we often ask ourselves, so I'm involved in filmmaking every day, we often ask ourselves, where's the pocket mouse in a given story? In other words, where's that crystalline example that illustrates sort of the fundamental ideas that you want to get around? And I think the starfish and sea otter stories from the Pacific carry that ball. I think there's more stories to tell. I think Charles Elton and the food chain and his work on Arctic islands, I'm looking forward to telling that story. Again, it's in Serengeti Rules, that way in print form, so it's not yet in film form. And the Serengeti Rules itself is being adapted to a feature film as we speak with a 2018 release. So that's a longer form film, and it focuses on the lives and work of several pioneers, Bob Payne, Tony Sinclair, Mary Power, John Turborg, and it's kind of gone all around the world. And I just hope it's going to be a favorite for students and educators and scientists, because and this is a story that understand it's not just the science but people's motivations and their experiences. So I hope people can connect with these characters as humans, not just as scientists. And that's what we look to do in a lot of our storytelling. We just released an IMAX film on the experience, the wild adventure of Henry Walter Bates in the Amazon, called the Amazon Adventure. So that's starting to spread across the country.
Oh, I love that story. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we got the film coming out in August on the Voyager mission called The Farthest. That will be on PBS. And so one of the things I'm really trying to do is always use story as a vehicle to inspire interest in science and in any particular area of science. So
one of the most remarkable
Pocket Mouse is one way, but there's other ways to go. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the most remarkable books that I read from you, I mean, there's been many, but like the Into the Jungle really stuck with me. And that was a storytelling procedure there. And I just loved that one specifically. But what you're telling me is that you're causing me to increase my Sean Carroll library here.
Well, myself, my children, and my estate appreciate that. But really, fundamentally, especially for the teachers in the audience, storytelling as a way to, we crave stories. We seek them out all day long. And science is, it's detective stories, it's epic adventures, it's, full of drama and surprise and great settings, and I think even noble adventure, noble endeavors and things like that. So there's a lot of storytelling to be done in science, and in fact, that's the book I'm writing now. Serengeti Rules is very heavy story driven, and as was Into the Jungle, as you say, and these things also translate to film, which is, film is an easy commodity to share throughout the world. So that's why we do a lot of filmmaking as well.
Well, we know that you were just at the NSTA conference in the spring, and we are looking forward to seeing you coming soon to Milwaukee for the NSTA Regional. So make sure you know what kind of beer we'd like to buy for you. We'll make sure to do that for you, and we look forward to seeing you in the near future.
I'll see you then, and I'll be talking Serengeti Rules in Milwaukee for sure, and hopefully give everybody a couple of stories that might be sticky.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you so much.
All righty.
Thank you, Sean.
Good talking to you guys.
For links and other information related to this episode, visit laboutloud.com. You can send us your questions and comments at laboutloud.com/contact.
If you enjoyed the show, make sure you've subscribed on iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, or your favorite podcasting platform. And if you really enjoyed it, consider leaving us a rating or a review. Your feedback helps others find our show.
Until next time, I'm Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartel.